Imagine a place where human rights don't exist and survival is a daily struggle. Behind towering walls and razor wire fences, some of the world's most notorious prisons aren't just places of punishment. They're designed to break people completely. From the crushing isolation of the Alcatraz of the Rockies to the violent, overcrowded cells of Venezuela, these prisons push human suffering to its limits. Let's take a closer look at what life is like inside these real-life nightmares. Number 20. ADX Florence, USA. ADX Florence is the most secure prison in America, a place so extreme that few have ever left. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, this supermax prison was built in 1994 to hold the country's most dangerous criminals. But it's not just the walls and barbed wire that make it notorious. It's the complete and brutal isolation. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in a soundproof cell, completely alone. No conversations, no sunlight, no human contact. Over time, the silence drives even the strongest minds to paranoia, hallucinations, and complete mental breakdowns. Some prisoners are even force-fed just to keep them alive. Critics argue that this level of isolation is nothing short of psychological torture. Some even say it's worse than death. But what's life really like inside this prison? And why do so many believe there's no coming back from it? The mystery of the steel cage prison. Recently, strange images appeared online, showing what looks like a secret prison, where inmates are locked in steel cages under the blazing sun. If that wasn't cruel enough, reports claim the warden sets bonfires nearby to make the heat even more unbearable. But here's the twist. No one knows where this prison is. Experts have tried to track it down, but so far no solid answers. Some believe it's an elaborate hoax meant to shock people. Others fear it's real. What do you think? Could a prison like this actually exist? Number 19. La Santé, Prison, France. Hidden in the middle of Paris, La Santé Prison is where history and horror come together. Built in 1867, this prison once held public guillotine executions, where crowds gathered to watch. But even after the executions stopped, the suffering inside never did. Today, over 2,000 prisoners are crammed into small, filthy cells, surrounded by disease, violence, and despair. Overcrowding is so bad that La Santé has one of the highest suicide rates in France. For many, surviving here means facing not just the brutality of the guards, but also the constant threat of violent inmates. Even after closing for renovations in 2014, conditions inside remain harsh and unforgiving. Number 18. Evin Prison, Iran. Evin Prison isn't just a prison, it's a place people fear. While many prisons struggle with overcrowding, Evin is known for something even worse: torture. Built in 1972 under Iran's last Shah, the prison became infamous after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when the government used it to silence anyone who spoke out. Reports of beatings, solitary confinement, mock executions, and brutal interrogations are common. Many prisoners aren't even given fair trials before being locked away. One of the darkest events in its history was the 1988 prison massacre, where thousands of political prisoners were secretly executed. And the case of Zahra Kazemi, a Canadian-Iranian journalist who died after being tortured here, only added to its reputation. For many, ending up in Evin isn't just about serving time, it's about surviving something no one should ever experience. Number 17. Tadmor Prison, Syria. Tadmor Prison started out as military barracks in the 1930s, built by French Mandate authorities. But over time, it turned into something far worse. Under the rule of Hafez al-Assad and later Bashar al-Assad, it became a symbol of political oppression, notorious for holding and torturing anyone who dared to oppose the regime. One of the darkest moments in Tadmor's history happened on June 27, 1980, when around 1,000 inmates were executed in a single day as revenge for a failed assassination attempt on Hafez al-Assad. The prison became infamous for its horrific torture methods. Inmates were routinely beaten, electrocuted, and forced into painful stress positions for hours. Conditions were beyond inhumane: extreme overcrowding, barely any food, and almost no sanitation. Many prisoners didn't make it out alive. Palestinian writer Salam Kawakibi, who spent 2 years inside Tadmor, once said it wasn't even a prison because prisons are supposed to have basic human rights. Here, Fear and suffering were the only constants. Guards had absolute power, even the power to kill, without consequences. Tadmor was shut down in 2001, reopened in 2011, and ultimately destroyed by ISIS in 2015. But its reputation as one of the most terrifying prisons in history remains. Number 16, Pitești Prison, Romania. Pitești Prison in Romania is remembered for being one of the most brutal detention centers under the communist regime, especially in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Originally meant to house political prisoners, it quickly became a site of horrifying psychological and physical torture. The prison was at the center of a terrifying re-education experiment designed to force anti-communist activists, students, and religious figures to abandon their beliefs. The method? Torture, both physical and psychological. Prisoners endured brutal beatings, electric shocks, forced labor, and extreme starvation. Medical care was almost non-existent, and overcrowding made conditions even worse. One of the most disturbing aspects was the re-education program led by an inmate-turned-torturer, Eugen Turcanu. This program forced prisoners to betray and physically attack their fellow inmates, turning friends into enemies. The goal was to completely break their minds and erase their identities. From 1949 to 1951, this horrific program led to countless deaths and lifelong trauma for survivors. When details of what happened inside Pitești finally came to light, it sparked international outrage. Those responsible, including Turcanu, were eventually put on trial, and some were executed for their crimes. This prison raises a difficult question. Does any crime justify such punishment? Number 15. Qingcheng Prison, China. At Qingcheng Prison in China, dehumanization begins the moment inmates walk through the gates. Prisoners lose their names, replaced by 4-digit numbers. The first 2 digits mark their year of arrival, and the last 2 indicate their order of entry. This isn't just for organization. It's a way of stripping away their identities and reducing them to statistics, not people. Life inside is a constant struggle. Food rations aren't the same for everyone. They're based on age, crime, and even social status, meaning some prisoners get more than others. Showers are a rare privilege, only allowed once a week, or even less, depending on behavior. Even exercise must be earned, reinforcing the strict hierarchy and total control that defines the prison. For many, surviving Qingcheng means learning to obey without question, because in a place where even the smallest freedoms must be earned, there's no room for resistance. Number 14. Comity Maximum Security Prison, Kenya. Comity Maximum Security Prison, located in the heart of Nairobi, stands as a grim reminder of the darker sides of justice. Established in 1955, this notorious institution has long been a symbol of suffering and neglect, once serving as a detention center for political prisoners during the turbulent 1980s and early 1990s. Its history is marked by executions, brutal treatment, and dire living conditions that have led to tragic disease outbreaks, including a cholera epidemic in 2009 that claimed at least 8 lives. Originally designed to hold 1,400 inmates, the prison now houses more than twice that number, creating an overcrowded, suffocating environment where survival is a daily struggle. Inmates endure dehumanizing conditions, often subjected to severe beatings by guards, and despite some improvements following government interventions in 2002, the scars of its brutal past remain. Comity's reputation as one of the world's most infamous prisons endures, where hope flickers faintly amidst the relentless realities of despair. Number 13. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. Black Dolphin Prison is one of Russia's oldest and most extreme prisons, designed for the country's worst criminals, terrorists, cannibals, and serial killers. Life here is pure punishment. Inmates must stand for 16 hours a day, never allowed to rest or sit down. Even during transfers, they are blindfolded to prevent them from memorizing the prison's layout and planning an escape. Each day, prisoners get 90 minutes of exercise, but it's not for their health. While they walk in circles, guards tear apart their cells, searching for contraband. The prison follows strict routines. The only personal belongings allowed are books, newspapers, and radios. Food is a thin, sour soup served 4 times a day. Every 15 minutes, guards check on prisoners who must respond immediately with, "Yes, sir." Black Dolphin isn't just a prison, it's a place designed to break people down completely. Number 12. Rikers Island, New York, USA. Rikers Island, one of the most infamous prisons in the US, has faced decades of controversy over violence, corruption, and inhumane treatment. One of its most shocking practices is the strip search policy. Even people arrested for minor offenses are forced to undress and undergo intrusive cavity searches, all in the name of security. Inside, the system is just as brutal. Teenage inmates are often turned into enforcers, used by guards to intimidate and attack other prisoners. Violence is everywhere: physical beatings, forced isolation, and even deadly assaults. Many inmates have died due to mistreatment, leading to multiple lawsuits and calls for reform. In recent years, pressure has been growing to shut Rikers Island down completely. Activists argue that the prison is beyond repair and that a complete overhaul of the US prison system is needed. Number 11. Pollsmoor Prison, South Africa. Pollsmoor Prison in Cape Town is less of a prison and more of a war zone. Inside, gang hierarchies decide who lives and who dies. Originally built for 4,000 inmates, the prison now creams over 7,000 people into its decaying buildings. Disease runs rampant. Tuberculosis, HIV, and other infections spread like wildfire due to poor ventilation, lack of medical care, and filthy, overcrowded cells. Prisoners are packed into tiny rooms, sometimes 40 men crammed together, sleeping in triple-stacked bunk beds. With no space, no hygiene, and no protection, fights break out daily, often escalating into full-scale riots. Even the guards aren't safe, sometimes caught in the crossfire. Despite its dark reputation, Pollsmoor is also the prison where Nelson Mandela was once held. But while South Africa has moved forward in many ways, this prison remains a place of violence, disease, and relentless suffering. Human rights organizations have repeatedly condemned the prison's brutal conditions, but real change still feels far away. Number 10. San Quentin State Prison, California, USA. San Quentin is California's oldest prison, built in 1852, and it remains the largest death row facility for male inmates in the US. Over the years, it has housed some of the most notorious criminals, including Edward Bunker. Despite its name, rehabilitation is the last thing this place is known for. Many parts of the prison are outdated, filthy, and falling apart, creating serious health risks for inmates. But worse than the conditions is the violence. Gangs rule the prison, and clashes, stabbings, and murders are common. Even guards aren't innocent, with multiple reports of abuse, torture, and excessive force. Isolation cells, meant for punishment, leave inmates trapped in tiny, windowless rooms for weeks or months, pushing many to the edge of insanity. San Quentin's dark reputation has inspired movies, documentaries, and books, but the reality inside is far more terrifying than any Hollywood script. Number 9. Hworyong Concentration Camp. Camp 22, North Korea. Hworyong, also known as Camp 22, is one of North Korea's most horrifying secrets. This concentration camp isn't just for criminals, it's for political prisoners and their entire families, thanks to the country's guilt by association policy. Life inside is pure nightmare fuel. Prisoners are forced into backbreaking labor in mines, farms, and factories, often with no food, no medical care, and no basic necessities. Disease spreads fast, and malnutrition is so severe that many prisoners don't survive long. Torture is a daily reality. Defectors and satellite images have exposed horrifying details, including beatings, executions, and psychological torment. Prisoners are forced to witness brutal punishments, knowing they could be next. In 2012, reports surfaced that Camp 22 had been shut down, but no one knows for sure. The North Korean regime is so secretive that the fate of thousands of prisoners remains unknown. This camp stands as a terrifying symbol of North Korea's brutal control over its people. Number 8. Gitarama Prison, Rwanda. Once called Muhanga Prison, Gitarama is one of the deadliest prisons in the world. It was originally built for 400 prisoners, but today it holds more than 7,000, turning it into a living hell of disease, starvation, and violence. The overcrowding is so extreme that inmates are forced to stand for hours or even days because there's no room to sit or lie down. Food is scarce, and some prisoners have been driven to cannibalism just to survive. Diseases like tuberculosis spread rapidly, and with little to no medical care, many prisoners die slow, painful deaths. There is no proper sanitation, and the stench of death, sweat, and filth fills the air. Once someone enters Gitarama, their chances of making it out alive are terrifyingly low. Number 7. El Rodeo Prison, Venezuela. El Rodeo Prison is a battleground where survival depends on power, corruption, and luck. Basic necessities like food, clean water, and healthcare are in short supply, and corrupt prison officials use these resources as tools of control. Inside, life is brutal and divided by hierarchy. Prisoners with connections or influence live slightly better, while those without power are left to suffer. But even for the privileged few, the constant threat of violence looms. Gangs run the prison from the inside, controlling everything from food rations to weapons and protection. Overcrowding makes things even worse. Cells meant for a few inmates now hold dozens, and deadly diseases spread rapidly. Gang wars and riots erupt frequently, with some of the bloodiest clashes leading to mass killings. The Venezuelan government has tried multiple times to restore order, even deploying the military to control the chaos. But the corruption, gang dominance, and inhumane conditions persist, leaving El Rodeo as one of the most dangerous prisons in the world. Number 6. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, USA. Alcatraz, known as The Rock, is one of the most legendary prisons in American history. Located on an isolated island in San Francisco Bay, it was designed to house the most dangerous criminals while making escape nearly impossible. Operating from 1934 to 1963, Alcatraz held infamous inmates like Al Capone and Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz. Prisoners endured harsh conditions, living in small, cold, solitary cells with strict daily routines. Punishment was severe. Solitary confinement was common, pushing many inmates to mental breakdowns. Some prisoners, like Ed Woodka, died by suicide, while others resorted to self-mutilation from the overwhelming stress. Despite its reputation as escape-proof, a few daring prisoners attempted breakouts, with the most famous being the 1962 escape of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, which inspired the film Escape from Alcatraz. Though their bodies were never found, their story remains one of the great prison mysteries. Alcatraz closed in 1963 due to high operating costs, but later reopened as a museum, attracting visitors from around the world who come to experience its eerie history firsthand. Number 5. Bang Kwang Central Prison, Thailand. Nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton, Bang Kwang Central Prison couldn't be further from luxury. This high-security facility was built to hold 3,500 inmates, but today it crams in over 8,000, including long-term convicts and death row prisoners. From the moment they arrive, new prisoners face harsh realities. Many are shackled in leg irons, sometimes for years, and forced to endure grueling labor. Cells are overcrowded, with up to 25 inmates crammed into tiny spaces meant for a fraction of that number. Food is barely edible, and healthcare is almost non-existent. Foreign prisoners face additional struggles, cut off from their families and unable to communicate due to language barriers. Those on death row live in constant fear, knowing that executions, once carried out by firing squad, now by lethal injection, could happen at any time. Reports of abuse, corruption, and extreme violence within Bang Kwang have sparked international outrage, but inside its walls, suffering continues with no end in sight. Number 4. Diyarbakir Prison, Turkey. Diyarbakir Prison, located in southeastern Turkey, is infamous for its brutality, political repression, and inhumane conditions, especially during the 1980s and 1990s. Originally built to house criminal offenders, it became a primary detention center for Kurdish activists, political dissidents, and alleged members of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, following the 1980 military coup. Prisoners were crammed into overcrowded, unsanitary cells, and food and medical care were scarce, leading to malnutrition and disease. Reports from former inmates detail gruesome torture, including electric shocks, severe beatings, and psychological abuse. The prison's notorious death corridor, was an area where inmates were routinely tortured and executed. One of the darkest moments in its history came in 1982, when Kurdish prisoners staged a hunger strike in protest of their treatment. Several inmates died, drawing international condemnation. However, the Turkish government at the time largely ignored calls for reform. Although some improvements have been made in recent years, overcrowding, abuse, and neglect remain persistent issues in Turkish prisons. Human rights organizations continue to monitor conditions, urging the government to ensure humane treatment and legal protections for prisoners. Number 3. Mendoza Prison, Argentina. Mendoza Prison, also known as Prison Number 1 of Mendoza, is one of Argentina's most notorious detention facilities, plagued by extreme overcrowding, gang violence, and inhumane conditions. Originally built to hold 600 inmates, the prison now houses over 2,000, forcing prisoners into cramped, unsanitary spaces with limited access to water, food, and medical care. Inmates often go months without seeing a doctor, and diseases spread rapidly due to poor hygiene and lack of resources. Violence is a daily reality, as gangs dominate the prison and control access to basic necessities. Reports from human rights organizations highlight cases of torture, physical abuse by guards, and neglect, further worsening the already inhumane conditions. Adding to the crisis, many prisoners struggle to access legal representation, making it nearly impossible for them to appeal their cases or seek justice. The absence of effective rehabilitation programs ensures that many inmates fall into a cycle of reoffending, perpetuating the prison's ongoing crisis. Despite calls for reform, Mendoza Prison remains one of the most dangerous and overcrowded facilities in Latin America. Number 2. Goldani Prison, Georgia. Goldani Prison, located in Tbilisi, Georgia, became internationally infamous in 2012 when shocking video footage revealed guards torturing, beating, and sexually abusing inmates. The scandal sparked mass protests and forced the Georgian government to acknowledge severe human rights violations within its prison system. Before the revelations, prisoners at Goldani endured severe overcrowding, corruption, and brutal treatment from guards. Many were deprived of medical care, subjected to torture, and denied basic human rights. In response to the scandal, Georgia implemented significant reforms, including increased oversight of prisons, training programs for prison staff on human rights, legal reforms to reduce overcrowding and improve conditions. While some improvements have been made, prisoner abuse, corruption, and poor living conditions remain ongoing issues in Georgia's prison system. The Goldani scandal serves as a stark reminder of the challenges in ensuring humane treatment for inmates worldwide. Number 1. Maracaibo National Prison, Venezuela. Maracaibo National Prison, located in Venezuela, is one of the most overcrowded and lawless detention facilities in the world. Originally designed for 700 inmates, it now holds over 3,700 prisoners, creating a nightmarish environment of violence, disease, and chaos. One of the most critical issues is severe understaffing. With only one guard per 150 inmates, maintaining order is virtually impossible. As a result, gangs effectively run the prison, turning it into a lawless stronghold where violence is a daily reality. Basic necessities such as food, water, and medicine are scarce, leading to malnutrition and the rapid spread of diseases. Hygiene is almost non-existent, with prisoners forced to live in filth. Deadly fights frequently break out, fueled by the unbearable conditions and intense gang rivalries. Despite international outcry, the Venezuelan government has done little to address the crisis. The combination of overcrowding, lack of resources, and rampant violence makes Maracaibo one of the most dangerous prisons in the world, where survival is a daily struggle. From lawless gang-run prisons to political detention centers notorious for torture, these facilities expose the darkest realities of the global prison system. Despite efforts in some countries to reform their systems, brutality, overcrowding, and inhumane conditions persist in many parts of the world.
Can you imagine being locked in a cage, deprived of your freedom and dignity? Where violence stalks the corridors and darkness prevails behind bars? This grim reality exists right now for women incarcerated in some of the world's most brutal female prisons. How far would you go to survive the violence and despair in these notorious prisons? Let's begin counting down the 10 most dangerous facilities for women inmates worldwide. Number 10. Banha Prison, Egypt. Kicking off our list at number 10 is Bana Prison in Cairo, Egypt. Egypt, can you imagine being crammed into a tiny cell with dozens of other inmates? At Bana, around 2,500 women are stuffed into space meant for just 600. Cells overflow with bodies stacked on top of each other. Women have to take turns even sitting down or lying down to sleep. How would you cope in such confined quarters? But it gets worse. Stories seep out describing routine torture by guards. Hygiene standards make garbage dumps seem pristine, with skin diseases spreading unchecked. Visits from family members are near impossible to arrange, severing inmates' last lifelines to hope. What happens when contact with loved ones is taken away? Silence and isolation prevails in this Middle Eastern hellhole. Is solitary confinement a justified punishment or psychological torture? Leaving the crowded chaos of Bana prison, we travel west to a massive facility warehousing thousands of women. Number 9. Central California Women's Facility, USA, also known as Chowchilla. This institution in California is the largest women's prison in the world. Housing over 3,500 inmates, imagine being warehoused on such a vast scale. Gang violence rages inside Chowchilla's crowded tiers. Prison guards allegedly turn a blind eye, allowing the most ruthless inmates to rule. How would you stay safe with violence lurking around every corner? Weaker prisoners are subjected to physical and sexual abuse. It's survival of the fittest taken to the extreme. With assaults a daily occurrence, the threat of violence looms heavy for the women incarcerated here. Is it ethical for guards to allow abuse between inmates? For women inside Chowchilla, every day brings new dangers in this gladiator-like environment. From the lawless world of Chowchilla, we head to a remote prison haunted by silence and starvation. Number 8. Puli Charkhi Prison, Afghanistan. In the bleak, dusty plains near Kabul lies Afghanistan's largest and most notorious prison, Puli Charkhi. Inside its creaking walls, the women's section is notoriously grim. Starvation stalks the cell blocks, with inmates permanently on the brink of hunger. Can you imagine the pain of constant gnawing emptiness in your stomach? Torture and interrogation are also rampant, sometimes leading to false confessions. What tactics might guards use to extract untrue admissions of guilt? Inmates can languish in total isolation for weeks, even months, as a harsh punishment. Meanwhile, the on-site graveyard keeps expanding, hinting at a shocking mortality rate. What kind of medical neglect allows prisoners to perish unchecked? Departing the desolation of Puli Charkhi, we next visit a teeming facility bursting well beyond capacity. Number 7. Tihar Jail, India. With 17,000 prisoners crammed in, Tihar Jail in New Delhi, India is bursting at the seams. The air is thick with tension as violence rages inside this co-ed facility. Guards are said to accept bribes in exchange for smuggled contraband. When guards are corrupt, who keeps the prisoners safe? Perhaps most shocking, thousands reportedly languish in Tihar without ever being convicted of a crime, trapped in judicially approved limbo. Is it ethical to imprison the not guilty? With such crushing overcrowding and corruption, Tihar has cemented its reputation as one of Asia's most notorious prisons. Our journey continues deep into the Russian wilderness, home to the nation's most notorious prison. Number 6. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. Deep in the forests of western Russia lies Black Dolphin Prison, the nation's most secure facility. Holding the country's most violent female and male criminals, it's Russia's version of Alcatraz. Inmates reportedly must stand blindfolded and hunched when being transferred, a process that takes hours. Imagine the discomfort and disorientation of this experience. They are supposedly not allowed to rest on beds during the day either, ensuring complete submission to the system. What effect does sleep deprivation have on the human psyche? The psychological torment in Black Dolphin is relentless. Next up is a place where deprivation rules and disease runs rampant. Number 5. Bangkok Hilton, Thailand. Cramming over 2,000 women into space for 500, Bangkok Hilton is vastly overcrowded. The air is thick with sweat and heat due to lack of ventilation. Skin diseases run rampant with no hygiene or health care. What happens when sickness is allowed to spread unchecked in such cramped confines? Prisoners are subjected to brutal attitude adjustment programs involving physical and mental abuse. The cruel guards also control access to food, water, and health care. Survival in the Bangkok Hilton requires remaining invisible and hoping to not attract negative attention. Is it right to use deprivation as a weapon against prisoners? From the sweltering Bangkok Hilton, we cross the Pacific to a prison where progressive ideals have collapsed. Number 4. Valley State Prison, California. Once hailed as a pioneering facility, Valley State Prison now lives in infamy. Violence exploded after male inmates were transferred in. Abuse at the hands of guards is common, who exploit female inmates in the chaotic and understaffed facility. When guards become abusers, who can prisoners turn to for help? An inmate black market also apparently exists where favors and contraband are exchanged. Progressive policies lie in tatters amidst the disorder. The women inmates did not choose or expect these conditions when entering Valley State. Does sentencing someone to prison also sentence them to violence if reforms fail? Nearing the top of our list, we travel to a jail known for its unrelenting cruelty. Number 3. Rose M. Singer Center, Rikers Island, New York. Better known as Rosie's, this jail lies within the notoriously violent Rikers Island complex in New York City. Rosie's inmates regularly endure neglect, abuse, and brutality from guards. Mental health care is scarce, leaving the mentally ill to languish. Is it ethical to imprison the mentally ill alongside the general population? Violence between rival gang members is also rampant, earning it the nickname Gladiator School. For female inmates, Rosie's is a daily gauntlet of cruelty, with little chance of redemption. What does it say about our correction system if prisons have earned nicknames comparing them to ancient bloodsport arenas? In second place lies a prison revealing the darkest extremes of human suffering. Number 2. Alcalá Prison, Spain. The aptly named Black Palace of Death. Alcalá Prison is notorious for human rights violations in Spain. Deprivation and overcrowding have led to reports of widespread physical abuse, illness, and even death. What happens to human dignity when prisons become overcrowded torture chambers? The lack of mental stimulation for prisoners is considered a form of psychological torture. Alcalá has established an infamous reputation as one of the most oppressive prisons in Europe. What conditions lead prisons meant for rehabilitation to descend into notorious hellscapes? Number 1. Talavera Bruce Prison, Brazil. And now the most dangerous female prison on earth. Talavera Bruce Prison in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Also known as Pedrinhas Prison, it has been condemned by Amnesty International for its shocking conditions. Violence is rampant, with inmates forming deadly gangs that kill on order. Sexual abuse is common in this largely lawless compound. The guards are accused of taking bets on the death toll. Food, healthcare, and sanitation are inadequate, causing rampant disease. Of all the nightmarish prisons on this list, Pedrinhas is likely the most chaotic and lethal. When the rule of law breaks down completely, what hope remains for prisoners already stripped of basic human rights? There you have it, the disturbing tour of the 10 most dangerous female prisons worldwide. From disease-ridden hellholes to gang-controlled gladiator arenas, these institutions represent some of the worst forms of human rights violations. We've seen how corruption, overcrowding, violence, and cruelty collide behind bars, creating nightmarish conditions for inmates. Women suffer immensely in these notorious prisons, both mentally and physically. The trauma they endure in such dehumanizing environments can last a lifetime. But here is the haunting question. Are these correctional facilities meant to rehabilitate or merely punish without mercy? Should prisoners pay their debt to society or be subjected to new trauma and injustice? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. See you in the next video. Until then, bye.